The courtroom was already filled when the elderly woman walked in. The sound of shoes scraping the floor and people whispering filled the air. The woman moved slowly, holding a small handbag and a stack of papers that looked old and worn. She found a seat in the front row, her eyes darting around nervously as if she didn't belong there. Her back was slightly bent, and her gray hair was neatly tied in a bun. She wore a plain blue dress that had faded over time. But even though her clothes looked simple, there was something graceful about her. The way she held herself, the quiet way she spoke to the clerk when her case was called. When her name echoed through the courtroom, she stood up, her knees shaking slightly, and made her way to the front. The judge, sitting high above, didn't even look up from his papers at first. He was a tall man with a sharp face and a look that said he had seen too many cases to care about another one. "Your case is about unpaid property taxes?" he asked without emotion, finally glancing at her. "Yes, sir," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's about my house. I've lived there for over 40 years. I've been paying what I can, but I think there's been a mistake." The judge cut her off almost immediately. "A mistake?" he repeated with a smirk. "Everyone says that. The law doesn't care about excuses. You owe money to the county, and that's what this is about." She tried again. "Sir, I sent the payments. I mailed them before the deadline. I even have receipts, but they said they never got them." She opened her folder and started flipping through the old papers with shaky hands. The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen. "Ma'am," he said in a tone that carried a hint of annoyance, "this court isn't the post office. If you didn't make the payments properly, that's your responsibility. You can't just cry your way out of it." The woman froze. The word cry struck her, though she hadn't cried yet. But his tone, cold, careless, made her eyes burn. She swallowed hard and nodded slightly, trying to hold back her tears. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of the judge's gavel tapping the desk. A few people sitting behind whispered quietly, feeling sorry for her but unwilling to speak. The woman looked at the judge, her lips trembling. "I'm not asking for much," she said quietly. "I just need a little more time. My son is overseas serving this country, and he sends me money each month. It just got delayed this time. Please, sir, I've lived in that house all my life." The judge chuckled lightly and said, "Serving overseas, you say? That's noble, but this is a courtroom, not a charity. The law applies to everyone, even soldiers' mothers." A few people gasped quietly at his words. The woman looked down, tears finally rolling down her cheeks. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was humiliated. She had come here hoping someone would listen, but instead she was being mocked in front of strangers. The judge leaned forward, almost impatient now. "Do you have proof that you made these payments?" She held out her folder. "Yes, I do," she said softly. He waved to the bailiff to take it, flipping through the papers quickly. After a brief glance, he shrugged. "These are not official receipts. These are money order stubs. They don't prove anything unless the county confirms them. But they told me they would." "Enough," he said sharply, raising his hand. "The court has heard enough. The decision will be made based on evidence, not emotions. Until then, the eviction notice stands." Her lips parted slightly. She blinked in disbelief. "Sir, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have nowhere else to go. I'm not trying to disobey the law. I just—" The judge laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "Ma'am, everyone who stands here says the same thing. Maybe next time you'll take responsibility before it gets this far." The laughter, quiet but sharp, hit her harder than any words. Her body stiffened. For a moment she didn't even move. It wasn't anger she felt, it was shame. She nodded slowly and whispered, "Thank you, Your Honor," before turning around. Her steps back to the bench were slow, heavy, and painful. No one spoke. The clerk looked down awkwardly, pretending to shuffle papers. The bailiff glanced away. It was as if everyone felt the wrongness of what had just happened, but didn't dare say a word. As she reached the door, the judge called out, "Next case." His voice echoed through the room like nothing had happened. Outside, the air felt thick and hot. She stepped onto the courthouse steps and took a deep breath. Trying to calm her racing heart, she wiped her tears with the edge of her sleeve. Embarrassed even though no one was watching now, she sat down on the cold concrete bench nearby, staring out at the cars passing by. A few minutes later, a young reporter who had been covering small local cases walked out of the courthouse. She had seen everything from the back row and felt uneasy. She wasn't supposed to get involved, but something about the scene bothered her deeply. She walked over gently and said, "Ma'am, are you all right?" The old woman forced a small smile. "Oh, yes, dear," she said softly. "I'll be fine." The reporter hesitated. "That judge was very harsh to you. I don't mean to intrude, but you didn't deserve that." The woman sighed and looked down at her hands. "People in power forget sometimes that we're human too. I came here just hoping to explain myself, not to fight." The reporter sat beside her, lowering her voice. "Do you mind if I ask what happened? I saw you mention your son. You said he's overseas?" The woman nodded. "Yes, my son's in the military. He's been serving for many years now. He sends money home every month so I can manage things. He's a good boy, always looking out for me. But this time there was a delay and I couldn't pay everything on time. I thought if I explained it, they'd understand." Her voice trembled slightly at the last words. The reporter's heart sank. She had covered dozens of courtroom stories, but something about this one felt different. There was dignity in the woman's pain, a quiet strength that showed she wasn't bitter, just deeply hurt. "I'm really sorry this happened," the reporter said. "If it's all right with you, I'd like to share what happened today. Not to embarrass you, but so people can see how unfair this was." The woman looked at her for a moment, surprised. "Oh, child," she said with a faint smile. "You can tell it if it helps someone. Maybe it will remind them to be kinder than he was today." The reporter smiled back, touched by her grace. She asked for a few details, carefully writing notes in her small notebook. The woman spoke calmly, never raising her voice, never showing anger. When they were done, the reporter said goodbye and promised to send her a copy of whatever she wrote. The old woman nodded and said softly, "Thank you for listening. That's all I needed today, someone to listen." As the reporter walked away, she looked back once more. The elderly woman was still sitting there, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on the courthouse doors. It was as if she was waiting for something, maybe for the world to remember her humanity. The sun had started to dip, painting the steps in golden light. A breeze lifted the edges of her dress. She looked tired, but her face carried quiet resilience, the kind that comes from years of hardship, faith, and patience. Across town, the judge ended his day without a thought about what had happened. To him, it was just another case, another day in court. He didn't realize that his laughter, careless as it was, would soon travel far beyond those courtroom walls. That night, the young reporter sat at her desk, typing her story. She didn't add drama or exaggeration. She simply told the truth, how an elderly woman had stood in court with dignity, and how the man meant to uphold justice had mocked her instead of helping her. When she posted it online, she expected maybe a few people to read it. But within hours it spread like wildfire. Thousands began sharing it, leaving comments filled with shock, anger, and sympathy. Some wrote, "That judge needs to be removed." Others said, "That woman deserves justice by morning." The story had reached far and wide, even to a place the reporter could never have imagined. In a quiet military base halfway across the world, a U.S. colonel sat at his desk reading an email from a friend. The subject line said, "You need to see this." As he opened the link and saw his mother's face on the screen, tearful, humiliated, but still composed, his heart sank. He stared at the image for a long time, the room silent except for the faint hum of a ceiling fan. He closed his eyes, remembering her voice from their last call. "I'm fine, son. Don't worry about me." Now he realized she hadn't been fine at all, and the man who had laughed at her and the judge who thought she was nobody was about to learn just how wrong he was. The colonel stared at the computer screen for a long time, frozen in disbelief. The article showed a picture of his mother standing outside a courthouse, her eyes red and tired, her hands holding that same folder he had seen so many times when he visited home. She had looked proud when she told him about that folder, how it held all the papers for the house his father had worked so hard for. Now, reading the words beneath the photo, something in his chest tightened. The article described how a judge had mocked her, how people in the courtroom had sat in silence while she stood there alone. Each line felt like a knife twisting deeper. He leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. For years he had faced battles, but none of them hurt quite like this. Out there on the field, he could see his enemies. He could defend himself. But this, This was his mother being humiliated in a place meant for justice. A fellow officer knocked on his door and stepped in. "Colonel, everything okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, just something personal." The officer looked at the screen and frowned. "Is that—" The colonel gave a small nod. "That's my mother." The officer's expression softened. "Sir, I'm sorry." The colonel didn't reply. His mind was already racing. He thought about the long phone calls with his mother when she'd say she was fine, that she didn't need anything. She had always been like that, strong, proud, never wanting to be a burden. He had promised her years ago that she would never have to worry about anything again, and now she was sitting in court begging for mercy, while a man in a robe laughed at her tears. He stood up suddenly. "I need to go home." Within 24 hours, arrangements were made. He was granted temporary leave. He didn't tell his mother he was coming. He wanted to see her face, to surprise her, and to make sure she was truly all right. When his flight landed 2 days later, the city felt strange to him. The air was heavy, and every billboard, every newspaper at the airport seemed to carry the same story. Elderly woman mocked in court, judge under fire. He realized his mother's story had gone far beyond their small town. Reporters were still writing about it. People across the country were sharing her photo, calling her brave, calling for the judge's removal. He drove straight from the airport to her small house on the corner of an old neighborhood street. The moment he stepped out of the car, he saw her through the window, watering her plants as if nothing in the world had happened. When she opened the door and saw him standing there in his uniform, she gasped. "My boy!" she cried, her eyes welling up with tears. He hugged her tightly, almost lifting her off the ground. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just held on to each other. After a while, he led her to the couch and sat beside her. "Mama, why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly. She shook her head, brushing away a tear. "Because you have enough to worry about. You're out there serving the country. I didn't want to trouble you with my problems." He sighed, his heart aching. "You're never a trouble. You're the reason I can do what I do." She smiled faintly. "It's all over now. I'll find a way to fix it." But he could see the worry in her eyes, the way her fingers nervously twisted the edge of her dress. He said quietly, "It's not over until that man apologizes to you, and until you get your house back, properly and safely." She tried to protest, but he raised his hand gently. "Mama, please, let me handle this." That night as she slept, he sat at the small kitchen table, reading through all the documents she had saved. Every receipt, every letter, every piece of proof that she had paid her taxes was neatly kept. He noticed that the mistake wasn't hers. It was a clerical error from the county's office. The payments had been sent but not properly recorded. The more he read, the angrier he became. His mother had done everything right. She had been treated like a criminal for no reason other than a system that didn't care to listen. Early the next morning, he put on his uniform again and drove to the courthouse. People turned their heads when he walked in. There weren't many men in full military dress in that small town. Some recognized him from the photo that had gone viral. The judge was already in session, his voice booming as he handled another case. The colonel stood quietly in the back of the room until the case ended. When the judge looked up, their eyes met. The judge blinked, clearly surprised to see him. "Can I help you, sir?" The colonel stepped forward calmly. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to speak about the case you handled 2 days ago, the eviction of an elderly woman over a tax issue." The judge's expression tightened. "That matter has already been ruled on. If you wish to appeal, you may file the proper paperwork." The colonel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The calm in his tone carried authority. "I'm not here to argue the law, sir. I'm here because that woman is my mother." The courtroom went still. The judge's face paled. For a long moment, no one said a word. The colonel continued. "I read the article. I watched the footage. You laughed at her when she cried. You told her the law doesn't care about excuses. But she wasn't making excuses, she was asking for understanding." The judge tried to recover his composure. "Sir, emotions have no place in court. I treat everyone equally, with disrespect." The colonel interrupted softly. The judge's mouth tightened. "I didn't disrespect anyone." The colonel placed a folder on the desk in front of him. "Here are the receipts. Proof that my mother made every payment on time. The mistake was from your county's records, not her." The judge flipped through the papers, his hands shaking slightly. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of pages turning. It was clear now that the colonel was right. He looked up, struggling to find words. I wasn't aware. The colonel nodded once. That's exactly the problem, sir. You weren't aware because you didn't listen. You saw an old woman who looked small and scared, and you assumed she was wrong. You laughed at her instead of helping her. The judge opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. The truth hung heavy in the air. Finally, the colonel said quietly, "The law is supposed to protect people like her, not humiliate them. You forgot that." He turned and began to walk toward the door. As he did, people in the courtroom started whispering. Some even clapped quietly. The judge just sat there, staring down at the papers, his face red with shame. Outside, reporters had already gathered. Word had spread that the son of the woman from the viral story had returned. Cameras clicked as he walked down the courthouse steps, but he didn't stop for interviews. He only said one thing to the reporters. Respect isn't something you earn with power. It's something you show with kindness. That single sentence was enough to make headlines again. By evening, his words were all over television and social media. The story that had started as a moment of humiliation had now turned into a story of strength and dignity. Back home, the old woman sat on her porch, watching the sunset when her son returned. She smiled faintly as he walked up the path. "You went there, didn't you?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "I did. And I told him everything you couldn't." She sighed softly. "I didn't want to cause more trouble." He smiled and took her hand. "You didn't cause trouble, Mama. You reminded people what respect looks like." That night they sat together on the porch, not saying much. The wind carried the soft sounds of crickets and the old house creaked gently, like it was finally breathing again. The next morning a letter arrived from the courthouse. It was a formal apology from the judge, along with a notice that the case would be reopened and reviewed. The county office had already confirmed the payment error, meaning her home was safe. The woman held the letter in her hands and smiled through her tears. "I told you it would be all right," she said softly. Her son nodded. "Yes, but now the world knows it too." For the first time in weeks she laughed, a light, joyful laugh that filled the small house. The pain she had carried began to lift. She wasn't just a story anymore. She was a reminder that no one is too small to be heard. And as her son looked at her, he silently promised himself one thing, that no one would ever make her feel small again. The next few days after the apology were quiet, but a strange kind of quiet, the kind that happens before everything changes. The old woman spent her mornings watering the flowers in her small garden, pretending everything was back to normal. Yet deep inside she could feel something was shifting. People in the neighborhood smiled at her now. Some even stopped to say how proud they were of her strength. She didn't see herself as strong, though. She had only spoken the truth and asked for fairness. Her son, the colonel, noticed how the town had started to talk differently. What began as one story had turned into a larger conversation. Newspapers were still printing updates about the case. The radio station had even discussed it, saying it showed the importance of humility in positions of power. But not everyone was comfortable with the attention. The judge, once feared and respected, now faced endless criticism. Everywhere he went, people whispered. Some turned away when they saw him. For years he had ruled with confidence, but now that confidence had cracks. In his quiet home, the judge sat alone in his study, reading letters that had been sent to his office. Some were angry. Others were disappointed. One of them simply said, "We expected better." Those 3 words hurt the most. He remembered the moment he laughed in the courtroom. It had seemed harmless to him then, just a sign of irritation. He never imagined it would be the moment that defined his career. Meanwhile, the colonel began receiving calls from organizations, reporters, and even local officials who wanted to honor his mother. But he turned them all down politely. He didn't want this to become a spectacle. His only goal was to restore her peace and dignity. Still, there was something unfinished. The judge's apology, written in neat legal words, didn't feel enough. It wasn't about revenge, it was about understanding. The colonel wanted the man who humiliated his mother to truly see the person behind that case number. One morning, the colonel drove to the courthouse again. The same building stood there, but it felt different this time. People greeted him kindly, some even shook his hand. The clerk nodded respectfully as he passed by. He asked to meet with the judge privately. The request was unexpected, but the judge agreed. Perhaps curiosity got the better of him, or perhaps guilt. When the colonel entered the judge's office, the air was heavy with silence. The judge stood up awkwardly, unsure whether to offer a handshake. The colonel nodded politely and took a seat. For a long moment, neither spoke. The ticking of the wall clock filled the room. Finally, the judge said, "I suppose you've come to discuss what happened." The colonel looked at him calmly. "I didn't come to argue. I came because I want to understand something." The judge frowned slightly. "Understand what?" The colonel leaned forward, his voice even and quiet. "How does a man who swore to protect justice forget to show compassion?" The judge didn't answer right away. His eyes lowered, staring at the desk. "It's not as simple as you think. We see hundreds of cases every month. People lie, cry, and manipulate the system. After a while, you stop seeing faces. You just see files." The colonel nodded slowly. "I believe you. But that's exactly what needs to change. When you stop seeing people, you stop serving justice." Those words hung in the air like a mirror the judge didn't want to look into. He rubbed his forehead and sighed. "I lost my patience that day. I thought she was another person trying to avoid responsibility. I didn't know she was your mother. I didn't know she had proof." The colonel's tone remained calm. "Would it have mattered if she wasn't my mother? Would it have mattered if she had no son to speak for her?" The question struck deep. The judge's shoulders slumped slightly. "You're right," he said quietly. "It shouldn't matter who she is. But I failed that day." There was a pause, and long and uncomfortable. The colonel could see the weight of guilt on the man's face. He didn't want to humiliate him further. He simply wanted him to learn. He stood up and said softly, "My mother forgave you already. I think it's time you forgive yourself. But do it by helping others the way you should have helped her." The judge looked up, surprised. "You think forgiveness is that easy?" The colonel shook his head. "No, but it's the only way forward." He walked out of the room, leaving the judge sitting alone, staring at the door long after it closed. Outside, the colonel took a deep breath. The air felt cleaner somehow. He didn't know if the judge would change, but he had done his part. In the following weeks, the case officially closed in his mother's favor. The county not only corrected the mistake, but also offered a written apology for the error in their system. The judge, now under review by the ethics board, faced the consequences of his behavior, but quietly, not in a way that destroyed him, but in a way that forced him to face what he had done. The old woman's life slowly returned to peace. People from all over the state sent her kind letters. Some even offered to help her with home repairs or groceries. She was touched, but often said, "I don't need much, just kindness." Her garden, once neglected when the stress was too heavy, bloomed brighter than ever that summer. She spent her mornings talking to neighbors who visited to check on her. The once quiet street now seemed warmer, as if her story had reminded everyone what empathy meant. One afternoon, the same young reporter who first wrote her story came to visit again. She brought a small basket of fruit and a gentle smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "Because of you, so many people started talking about respect and fairness. Even other judges are discussing how they handle cases now." The woman smiled kindly. "I didn't do anything special, dear. I just stood there and told the truth." The reporter shook her head. "That's what makes it special." Before she left, the reporter asked, "Do you mind if I take one more photo of you for the follow-up story?" The woman laughed softly. "Just make sure you get my flowers in the picture, too. They've been through a lot with me." That evening, the photo went online. The old woman sitting on her porch surrounded by blooming flowers, her smile gentle and peaceful. The caption read, "Grace after humiliation. The woman who reminded the world to stay kind." Thousands of people commented again, but this time, the tone was different. It wasn't anger or outrage. It was admiration. People said her strength gave them hope. Others shared their own stories of unfair treatment and how they found courage to stand up for themselves. Far away, the judge saw that photo too. He didn't skip past it like before. He stared at it for a long time. Then he closed his laptop and sat quietly, deep in thought. A week later, he made a call to a local legal aid center. When they answered, he said simply, "I'd like to volunteer my time to help people who can't afford lawyers." The woman on the other end was surprised. "Are you sure?" "You're a sitting judge," he sighed. "Not for much longer. But maybe I can still do some good before I go." And so, in a quiet office downtown, the man who once mocked a crying woman began listening to others, not from behind a bench, but sitting beside them, hearing their stories one by one. Back at home, the colonel spent his last few days with his mother before returning to his base. Every morning they shared breakfast on the porch. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they just sat in silence, enjoying the calm after all the storms. One evening, as the sun set, his mother turned to him and said softly, "I'm proud of you, son, but more than that, I'm proud that you still have a kind heart. Power never changed you." He smiled. "I learned that from you." When it was time for him to leave, she walked him to his car, holding his hand tightly. "Be safe," she said. "And remember, no matter how strong a person looks, everyone needs kindness." He nodded, kissed her forehead, and promised, "Always." As his car disappeared down the road, the old woman stood at her gate, waving until he was gone. Then she turned back to her porch, the evening breeze touching her face gently. She looked up at the sky and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for revenge or victory, but for peace in every heart that had once forgotten compassion. The world around her had changed, maybe only a little, but enough to give her hope. And that hope, she thought, was worth everything she had endured. The news spread faster than anyone expected. Within hours of the colonel's visit to the courtroom, the story had reached every corner of the internet. People from all over the country were talking about the arrogant judge who laughed at an old woman, and the soldier who stood up for her with calm dignity. It wasn't just gossip. It had become something bigger, a conversation about respect, fairness, and the way people in power sometimes forget that every person standing before them has a story. The next morning, the courthouse steps were crowded. Reporters waited outside with microphones. A few held up pictures of the elderly woman, asking anyone who passed by if they knew her. Some people were angry, others just curious. Inside, the same judge sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. The headline made his stomach turn. "Arrogant judge mocks crying grandmother in court. Her son, a U.S. colonel, confronts him." He scrolled down and saw thousands of angry comments. People were calling for him to be removed from the bench. Others shared their own stories of being mistreated in court. The judge leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face, but no amount of deep breathing could calm the panic growing in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt small. Across town, the elderly woman sat in her living room, unaware of how big her story had become. She was quietly folding clothes when her son walked in, holding his phone. "Mom," he said softly, "your story's everywhere." She looked confused. "Everywhere?" He nodded. "People saw the video. They're talking about what happened." The old woman sighed. "I didn't want all this attention," she said. "I just wanted to be treated fairly." Her son smiled gently. "I know, but maybe this needed to happen. Maybe it's helping others who've been treated the same way." She nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. She didn't want revenge or fame. She just wanted peace. The colonel had already filed a formal complaint with the judicial board. The process had started, and soon there would be a hearing to review the judge's behavior. But before that, there was something more important: saving her home. He met with a local veterans legal aid group. They were kind and understanding, and when they heard that the woman was the widow of a soldier, they offered help right away. They found that the eviction was based on a county error. A tax payment had been misplaced. One of the volunteers, a young lawyer, promised to handle the case personally. "Your mother will not lose her home," she said firmly. "We'll make sure of that." The colonel thanked her with genuine relief. He had seen combat and chaos, but this, fighting for his mother's dignity, felt even more personal. Meanwhile, the judge's world was falling apart. A formal investigation had begun, and he was called to appear before the ethics committee. In the hearing room, he sat across from a row of serious faces. They asked him to explain his behavior in court that day. He tried to defend himself, saying he was simply enforcing order. But when they played the video clip, his smirk, his mocking tone, the sound of the woman's voice breaking as she begged for understanding, his words died in his throat. The room was silent for a long time. Then one of the committee members said, "You forgot what this job means. It's not about power, it's about service." For the first time in his career, the judge felt ashamed. Outside the hearing, people gathered with signs. Some held pictures of the old woman and her son. thanking them for standing up. Others had come with their own stories, people who had faced unfair treatment and finally felt seen. The colonel stood quietly among them, not seeking attention. He didn't want to humiliate anyone. He only wanted justice to be done. That evening, the results came out. The Judicial Committee suspended the judge and placed him under review for misconduct. He was ordered to issue a public apology. When the news reached the woman's home, she was sitting on the porch, shelling peas into a bowl. Her son read the statement aloud. The judge's words were brief. "I deeply regret my behavior in court that day. I failed to uphold the dignity of my position and the respect owed to all citizens. I sincerely apologize to the woman and her family." The old woman listened quietly, then set her bowl down. "If he's truly sorry," she said softly, "then I forgive him." Her son looked at her in surprise. "After everything he did?" She smiled faintly. "Holding anger only hurts you. Maybe this will teach him to listen before he laughs." Her calmness humbled him. She wasn't thinking about revenge or pride, only peace. In the days that followed, the community rallied around her. Volunteers helped repaint her porch and repair her fence. Local businesses donated groceries and supplies. A few young people even planted flowers in her garden. She became something of a quiet symbol, not of fame or pity, but of strength, grace, and forgiveness. The reporter who had first spoken to her came back to visit. She wanted to thank the woman for allowing her to share the story. "You changed something," the reporter said. "People are looking at how the system treats the elderly differently now." The old woman shook her head gently. "I didn't change anything. People just needed to see kindness again." The colonel smiled proudly as he watched his mother speak. He realized that even without meaning to, she had done what so many tried to do through force. She had changed hearts. A week later, the property issue was officially cleared. The legal aid group handed her the final documents confirming that her home was safe. Tears filled her eyes as she ran her fingers over the paper. "This house has seen so much," she whispered. "Your father built that porch with his own hands." Her son hugged her. "And now it'll stay right where it belongs," he said. That night, as they sat together under the porch light, the air felt peaceful again. The chaos had passed, leaving behind a quiet strength. Across town, the judge sat alone in his dark office, packing his belongings into a box. He paused to look at the small plaque on his desk that read, "Justice is compassion in action." He had received it years ago as a gift, back when he still believed in those words. Now they felt heavy, like a reminder of how far he'd drifted from what mattered. He took the plaque out of the box and set it on top of his papers. Maybe, he thought, he could still find a way to live up to it. The next morning, he stepped down from his position temporarily. No one forced him to. He just knew it was the right thing to do. For the first time, he went to the community center where the veterans group met and asked if he could volunteer. When he saw the colonel there, helping sort donation boxes, their eyes met. The tension hung for a moment, then the judge spoke quietly. "I was wrong," he said. "Your mother deserved better." The colonel nodded. "She forgave you already," he replied. "You should forgive yourself." It wasn't an easy moment, but it was an honest one. Both men had learned something about humility, strength, and grace. Weeks later, when the colonel prepared to return to duty, he took one last walk through the neighborhood with his mother. People waved at them, smiling. The woman's garden bloomed brighter than ever. Pink roses, white lilies, and a little American flag by the steps. As they walked, she looked up at him and said, "You stood up for me, but you did it with respect. That's what made people listen," he smiled. "You taught me that, Mom." And as the evening sun painted the sky gold, they stood quietly in front of the house she nearly lost, grateful that life had brought everything full circle. The story wasn't about punishment, it was about learning. It was about what happens when ordinary people remind the world that kindness still matters, even in the places where it seems forgotten. That simple truth, her dignity, her son's quiet courage, and even the judge's eventual remorse, would stay with everyone who heard the story. And in that quiet neighborhood, under the soft glow of the porch light, peace finally returned to where it belonged.